Welcome to Making Melodies with uMelo, Episode 1, where we will go through the process of creating an original instrumental melody in a DAW piano roll, and show how we went from an empty canvas to this. First step. Get inspired. Easy. Open uMelo. One press. Done. Before we start shaping our melody, let's take a closer look at the inspiration crafted by uMelo. The inspiration comes in the form of an 8-measure melodic template that will be used as a starting guide to give our melody its initial shape. The motion component suggests that the melody should be ascending, which means the last note of the melody will end on a higher pitched note than the start note. The QLE component, quantity, length and emergence, tells us about the unique phrases contained in this melody. The quantity of unique phrases, how long they should last, and how often they should play. In this case, there are 4 unique phrases, labeled P1, P2, P3, and P4, with each lasting 1 measure in length. P1 plays 4 times in the melody, during measures 1, 3, 5, and 7. P2 plays twice, during measures 2 and 4. P3 plays once during measure 6 and P4 plays once during measure 8. The phrase component shows us the general melodic contour that each phrase can be expressed as. For this melody, the contour of the P1 phrase can be expressed as a double arch. P2 as a 1-note straight horizontal line. While P3 and P4 are both oblique zigzag contours, but should be different from each other since they are separate phrases in this melody. Here's an approximate overlay of the melodic template shape, which we can follow as tightly or as loosely as we want to create our melody's initial shape. Next, let's move on to the essential step of breathing some soul into this melody by crafting up its rhythm pattern. The type of rhythm to impart will greatly depend on the character or vibe you want the melody to have. We will go for an up-tempo active vibe in this melody. Each phrase contour will have its own rhythm pattern. A rhythm pattern is an irregular succession of notes, like a motif. A musical idea that has a small collection of notes, typically between 2 and 10 notes. A motif with lots of notes can even be split into smaller groups. Rhythm patterns don't need to be complex, but if you want the melody to be interesting and noticed, you need to make them contrast from the underlying steady metrical beat of the music. You can tap them out physically or click them into the piano roll. We will click ours into the piano roll to craft up our initial rhythm patterns for this melody. Looking at the melodic template shape overlay, there looks to be a call and response pattern that could happen in every pair of measures. P1 calls, then P2, P3, and P4 respond. So we'll try use the same rhythm pattern for P2, P3, and P4. Doing so would help to introduce an appealing balance of unity and variety in the melody as we use the same rhythm pattern with different contours. Note that we'll need to have 5 notes minimum to create a double arch contour. Okay, so now let's get started on our initial rhythm pattern. Nice. Time to shape. Pick a key. A minor. Okay. Now that we have our uMelo inspired melody shaped, we will work on creating the finished melody by imparting our individual artistic expression combined with some general techniques to guide us along the way. There are countless different versions that this melody could have finished as, and even then could still be revised further if needed, depending on harmonic content and other elements that play along with this melody in a piece of music, or even depending on the type of role you want the melody to have, though this is the version we have settled on. So let's take a look at some of the techniques used to create this melody. We'll start by bringing it back to a pure rhythm pattern. The rhythm pattern for P1 feels like it is 7 notes split into 2 motifs, playing as 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4. P2 has a 3-note rhythm pattern. P3 has a 4-note rhythm and 3 of those notes are the same as all of P2's notes. P4 has a 5-note rhythm and 4 of those are all the same as P3's notes. So all of the response phrases have very similar rhythm patterns which creates unity in the melody. But all of the response phrases will have a different contour which adds a pleasant balance of variety to the unity. P1, P3 and P4 all have cadences that end on a metrically strong beat, the first beat of the next measure, while P2 has a cadence that ends on a metrically weak beat, the offbeat after the fourth beat in that measure, which gives it an unresolved feel to help propel the melody forward into the next call and response pattern. The longest break between notes in the melody are between the last note of the P1 call and the first note of its responses, adding emphasis to the last note of the call phrase and allowing the listener time to perceive the call and response as 2 distinct phrases in the melody. The melody has a total of 43 notes, making it an active melody, with a higher proportion of those notes being offbeat, making it interesting, as it contrasts from the underlying steady beat. Now let's take a look at the melody in its finished form with the contour notes in place. P2, P3, and P4 are a sequence that provide a sense of melodic coherence, as the multiple phrases incorporate the same rhythmic notes, but are played with different contours. There is good use of the root, the third and the fifth, early on in the melody to help establish tonality, and supporting this also is that every call and response pair starts on the root note, before venturing out on its melodic journey. It has variety in motion, containing a good mix of steps, 1 to 2 semitones, leaps, 3 or more semitones, and repeats, where the next tone is the same as the previous. The melodic climax, which is the highest note in a melody, is positioned well here, allowing it to elicit an emotional response with the following attributes. It lands on a leap note, a leap of a fourth interval. It is the first note of the third response, P3, where the first note of the previous 2 responses, P2, were repeated tones of a different note which disrupts our natural expectations. The climax note also gets repeated a few times, and again gets to elicit an emotional response by disrupting expectations as the first note. Also a leap note of the final response P4 is an additional rhythm note that isn't played elsewhere in the melody. The calls have a motion that rise in pitch, giving a feeling of inquisition, and have cadence on the third of the scale. The last 2 responses have a motion that lower in pitch, giving a feeling of the reply, and have cadence on the fourth of the scale, which is a more conclusive sounding tone than the third. The fourth of the A minor scale has a less complex frequency ratio of 4:3 with respect to the root note than the third of the scale, with a ratio 6:5 with respect to the root note. The last note of the melody is at a higher pitch than the first note of the melody, as suggested by our uMelo melodic template, which allows for an overall ascending feel of the melody. Finally, we've replaced the piano sound we've been using to create this melody with a plucky bell-type sound, which has a quick attack and decay with zero sustain, which seems suitable for this staccato-type melody. This has been a valuable exercise in creating a melody according to the melodic template crafted by uMelo. The template saved us a bunch of time and effort, allowing us to very quickly go from an empty canvas to having a full melody idea. And although we may not find use for the final melodies created in this process, it does provide great experience and practice at crafting our own melodies, and it encourages us to try new creative possibilities which we may not have attempted otherwise. We really hope you've been able to take something away from this episode that you can add to or expand upon in your own creative processes. You can find more details about this episode listed in the video description. We'd love to see your discussion and questions in the comments section, and we'll catch you in the next one.